Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 45.
The other thing I would say to those who are interested in internships I think it's really important that you intern in a farm where you really respect their farming practices on one hand, but then the other important thing is that it's actually a financially sustainable operation.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers, and every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. On today's show, we have Jesse Straight of Whiffle Tree Farm. We discuss his multiple livestock species and how he got started. Also, we take a deep dive into the internships available on his farm. However, before we talk to Jesse, we are introducing a new segment to our podcast. It's 10 seconds about my farm. It's just a quick update to what's happening here and to help you get to know me as well as my farm. Right now, we have the bulls with the cows, and we turned the bulls out in early July using South Pole bulls. And then I put another bull with them just a week or two ago, just because I didn't get a breeding soundness eval done on the bulls. So just to be sure and add some security, I turned another bull out. They will stay out with the cows for the month of August, and then I will pull them away from the herd. We have been hot and dry here, as a lot of people in this area of the United States have been. We did get 3.7 inches of rain last weekend, so that was a blessing. And we're thankful for that, and things are starting to green up some, but the heat built right back in. So we'll see how long it lasts. Also, I want to do a quick update about my wife's health journey. She is doing good and recently completed radiation and a surgery, and she's doing good. She's getting ready for the new school year, and we'll be back in the classroom teaching soon. We appreciate all the prayers and well wishes, and those that reached out to us. Thank you. We appreciate it. Do you like the Grazing Grass Podcast? There are a few ways to support it. First, like our content on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you'll like our content, that helps, as well as sharing it. So share it to your story, share it to your reel. The more we get the word out, the better we can grow our community. Secondly, you can support the podcast by visiting the Grazing Grass website and clicking on the community link. Join our community and engage with others. It's a forum Let's try that again. It's a forum set up for grazing grass related discussion. Also, if you're there, you can click on the support button to subscribe to the podcast, and that just helps us. In a future episode, we'll talk more about that. We do want to say thank you to Jared for becoming a supporter. We appreciate it. And lastly, we have a link on the Grazing Grass website for merch. So if you click on the merch, it'll take you to an Etsy store we have set up with a few t-shirts. But enough of that. Let's talk to Jesse. Jesse, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited to have you on today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Yeah, thank you, Cal, for having me. I appreciate it. So my wife and I did not grow up as farmers, and I was a pretty typical suburban kid. Went off to college and studied religious studies and pre-med sciences, and clearly had no idea that I was going to become a farmer one day.
Those are not 2 degrees I hear mentioned with farming.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it doesn't kind of connect the dots in a normal way. But, actually I do see a lot of connection with sort of my theological studies and how those undergird some of our farming practices and principles, but it is more on the not practical but theoretical level. But in any case, yeah. So I just got interested after college. I read some books that made me very interested, and I probably couldn't have articulated it clearly then, but now in retrospect, I can see how it made sense for me to go in this direction based on my interest in history and priorities. And so, long story short, my wife and I, read a bunch of books, visited a bunch of farmers, began little enterprises here and there, and that brings us to 2009, when we moved back to my hometown of Warrenton, Virginia, which is about 50 miles southwest of DC, and began our farm, which at that point meant getting 50 baby chicks in the mail and learning how to raise chickens on pasture. And then we, over the last 12 to 13 years, have just built up our knowledge, our production, our customer base, our team, to the point where we are now. And we've done meat chickens, laying hens, turkeys, pork, and beef. And everything is raised on fresh pasture. We don't use any antibiotics, no chemical applications, non-GMO feed, and our beef is 100% grass-fed. We process all of our own turkey and meat chickens, and our pork and beef we take to the slaughterhouse. Yeah, and so at this point, we're doing about 14,000 meat chickens a year. We keep about 2,000 to 3,000 laying hens at any given point. We'll do about 1,300 turkeys for Thanksgiving, and we have a herd of around 100 to 150 beef cattle. And in the last several years, we've actually outsourced our pork because of land constraints. So we have 2 farmer friends that are raising our pork for us, but we do about 230 pigs a year. We'd like to bring the pork back in-house once we can kind of solve the land constraint issue, but that's where we are right now. And in terms of our sales outlets and what it looks like on the business side, we have a farm store, which is about 25% of our sales. We do what we call neighborhood deliveries from Maryland, DC, Northern Virginia to Central Virginia, and we also sell wholesale. Our wholesale is about 40% of our sales, and that would be to restaurants, butchers, small independent grocers, and even to other farms that don't do meat that we are offering. Say a vegetable farmer is offering a meat CSA with our meat kind of thing. And and then in terms of our team, it's myself, of course. We have 8 children that range from the age of 14 to 2. So my wife is very busy at home with homeschooling and taking care of all of them. So she's not as involved in the farm as she once was. But then there's generally about 4 full-time employees, 2 or 3 part-time employees, and then we have a really excellent poultry processing crew of about 10 to 15 people that help us every Wednesday from April through November. So that's, and then also I should mention my mom and a friend of hers clean and package eggs for us a couple days a week. So that's a picture of kind of what the team looks like. Oh, and then of course our interns. We have 1 to 4 interns at any given point throughout the year. And those are 4-month-long internships that go there's 3 sessions that go the whole year. So that's what that looks like there. Yeah, does that answer the question there, Cal?
Oh, that does. That gives us a nice overview of what you've got going on your farm, and it sounds like you've got a lot going on.
Yeah, it is.
So before we talk a little bit deeper about all that stuff, I think you said in 2009 you bought you ordered the baby chicks and started pasture poultry.
That's right.
For the first time. So let's just talk about getting started on that.
Yeah. I mean, I had been in conversation with Joel Saladin at Polyface Farm. He had been sort of one of my mentors, primary mentor, and my wife and I were married and had our first child at the time as a baby. And so the internship at Polyface wasn't really possible for us in terms of family housing. So I was like, all right, well, I can't do that internship, but I'm going to go ahead and get started just going off of books and taking day trips to Polyface and talking on the phone with Joel and those kinds of things. Yeah, that's how we got started. We had no idea what we were doing. We had a number of books, especially Joel Salatin's books on poultry farming, and we made lots of mistakes, and we got lots of help from generous people like Joel. And it was slow going because we were so green. I mean, I didn't know how to farm and I didn't know how to run a business, and so I was learning both the things at the same time. It was very intense, and it was definitely much slower going than if I'd had that background experience as an intern or growing up with it. But I had to sort of learn the hard way, and we definitely had some significant bumps, but we made it through, and I'm grateful to having made it through and to having all the help we did.
Is Polyface Farm fairly close to you?
It's about 2.5 hours from us.
Oh yeah, I thought they were in Virginia. I just wasn't quite sure how close to you. That was a tremendous resource for you.
Yes, definitely. I can't say enough how generous Joel and Daniel Salatin have been in terms of just opening up their farm and inviting me to learn from them. So that's I like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, either running a business or farming, and the only way I had a chance was to have a mentor and a model to follow, and that's the only way that someone like me would have a chance at that.
And just right there, you touch on a great point that so many people bring up, is having that mentor or someone that you can reach out to for your questions and get a hold of, visit their farm, and see what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's critical.
How did that first year turn out with your chickens?
Yeah, so we got a batch of 50 chicks. I had processed chickens with Polyface, and then we processed our own, and it was a total mess. I mean, we were just, those 50 chickens with a whole slew of friends took us all day because we just didn't know what we were doing. But then the next week, I went back to Polyface and all right, now I have all my questions. Now that I've saw, where all
yes.
my hang-ups were. So yeah, and then it was back and forth between processing our own, going to Polyface, processing with them, refining the process, coming back to the point where I just became much more confident. In that first year, we only raised and slaughtered it was probably 250 chickens. But that was a start. And the next year, I don't know, I think we did 1,200 chickens or something like that. And then we added laying hens, and then we added turkeys, and pretty much each year we added, a new enterprise between laying hens, turkeys, pigs, and beef cattle, as we got somewhat confident in the one we had been doing before, and we had a customer base that we could sell to. So,
are you still using the Salatin style chicken tractor to grow them in?
We're not. We have moved to the prairie schooner or mobile range coop kind of structure that's pulled by a tractor.
Oh, okay.
So the ones we have are the prairie schooner from Featherman. Those are 20 foot by 40 foot that we pull with our medium-sized 60 horsepower tractor, and we've had those for a couple of years now. I am actually just in the process of selling off of all our old Salatin shelters and sort of smaller A-frame shelters that we hand pulled, which served me well. I mean, we raised tens of thousands of chickens in those, and there's many merits to that. I think I'm happy I went with this larger schooner, but it's not a slam dunk. There's definitely pros and cons, and I definitely would recommend for someone starting out to really think hard about using a hand-pulled, inexpensive shelter of some kind, whether it's the Salatin model or it's more of an A-frame model. Lots of good permutations, but that was, I think, a wise way to get going.
As someone who hasn't done meat chickens, I agree with you, because I think starting off with that smaller size pen gets you in closer contact with your birds and really educates you on raising them. as opposed to your bigger building. You run into some issues there, you could lose a lot of birds quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I think just too, it's a lot to do with just infrastructure and capital. You don't have to own a tractor to pull a salvage shelter, and those schooners cost $10,000 a pop, and a salvage shelter you can build for $300 each. So you can build 6 salvage shelters for under $2,000, and you're going to spend $10,000 in the same kind of square footage on a schooner. And there's just other things where those salvage shelters, they can get transported from one farm to the next very easily. Whereas the schooners, they're 20 feet wide, they can't go on the road.
That's a good point.
So there's lots of things to consider, but like I said, I think it's a great way to start. I'm glad I started that way, but I am glad that we've moved to the schooners. I think there's some advantages there we can get into if you want to, but yeah, they've been good.
Let's talk about some of those advantages before we move into what else you added to your farm after your meat chickens.
Sure. So yeah, I think for us, our summers are pretty hot and humid, and so those salvage shelters being 2 feet tall, the chickens are really hot in there, and we would have to spend a lot of effort and time spraying the shelters off, spraying the birds off in the middle of the summer so they wouldn't die of heat stroke, especially the older birds that are closer to slaughter age. So that was a real time suck and liability. The schooners are much better ventilated, so the birds stay more comfortable and require less labor for us to keep them happy and alive. And then just in terms of sort of sustainable on the body, pulling 30 or 40 salvage shelters every morning, I really enjoyed that kind of physical work, but if you're a 100-pound female, that's just a whole different thing. To do so many day after day, you could really run into some health issues. And then, with the salvage shelters, with the nature of the feed, we'd have to come back in the afternoon to top off feed with the older birds. With the schooners, we're using those hanging cool feeders where we can basically put in enough feed where we don't have to come back in the afternoon. So it really cuts down on our trips and our labor. And then also the other advantage of the schooners is when it comes time to putting the chicks in there from the brooder, it's more efficient because you're not going to say, 7 or 8 salvage shelters and putting in 80 birds in each. You're just putting them all in this one big schooner, so it's kind of a faster move there. And then likewise, when you go to slaughter, crating up birds is very efficient, where what we'll do is we'll, in the dark, whether it's late at night or in the early morning, we'll pull the schooner off the birds when they're sleeping, and there'll be 500 birds just out in the open asleep that are just very easy to put in crates and crate very quickly. The salvage shelter can be sometimes annoying trying to get in there and get birds out of there and put them in crates. So there's some ease and efficiency in putting birds in and taking birds out of the schooner. And then the other thing too is that while our square footage per birds is about the same in a schooner versus a salvage shelter, every bird effectively has 800 square feet as opposed to 120 square feet in a salvage shelter. So that means that a given bird, even though they have the same proportion amount of square feet, they have a lot more to play in. So they can, they have a lot more room to go around and scratch and peck and harvest. So I think that sort of makes a better quality of life for the bird in that way as well.
Which all makes sense.
Some of the downsides would be the things I mentioned, where it's like, the salvage shelter is much less expensive. It's kind of like the farm where you build it is the farm it's going to stay. So say you're leasing land, and you can easily bring salvage shelters to lease land and then take them to another land. The schooner, you'd essentially have to most likely take it apart and put it back together to move it, which is not impossible, but it's not a fun prospect. And the other thing too is that, say you get a wind event and you get a couple salvage shelters that get blown around, you're not looking at a catastrophic loss. But if you were to have, your schooner fleet all flipped in a wind event, you might be looking at, well, with labor of constructing them and shipping and materials, you might be looking at, $75,000 in loss. And so that's a lot more stressful and more to think about, in terms of damage to infrastructure. So those would be some of the downsides.
Yeah, thank you for giving us a little bit more detail comparing the two shelter types.
Yep.
Before we move away from meat chickens, because we're going to talk about layers in just a minute.
Yeah.
That first year on raising your first chickens, the thing that scares some beginners and some veterans is marketing. How was marketing for you?
Yeah. I think marketing is probably one of those things that's one of my strengths. There's plenty of things that, my team would be able to tell you are not my strengths, and my wife would be able to tell you. But I know that it's probably one of my relative strengths, just because it's the thing that, when there's a list of things that I'm procrastinating on, it's not marketing. It's some other task that I don't want to do that, but I'll go and call a chef or, interact with a customer. So just in terms of my personality and inclination, I think that's just work that I enjoy doing. So yeah, that was not, I guess, in some degree swimming upstream for me. That came more naturally. I think of a story that kind of displays that. We probably had gotten, our second batch of chickens, and I'm on the house phone calling a chef, and my wife's in the room with me. I'm calling the chef, and I say, hey, chef, I'm a pasture poultry farmer, and blah, would you like to try some of my chicken? I can hear my wife in the background being like, you're not a pasture poultry farmer. You got 50 chickens in the yard. What are you talking about? She called my bluff, but that kind of goes to show that I was willing to take on that identity maybe before I even earned it. So that's something that I basically just would pursue any opportunity that I saw. So whether it was with a chef that I thought might be interested in our food, or whether, I wasn't bashful to approach friends and family and connections and tell them about what we're doing and why I think it's good and why, they should buy their food from us. And if there was a group that was interested in hearing a presentation about this model of farming, I was happy to do that. And I like to write. So in terms of things like email and social media, that's something that I enjoy doing. So I think that's a critical part of how to make this work, is that, you have to sell the food you raise, and you have to connect with customers and help them to understand the value of what you're producing. And it's something that I believe in. I believe that what we're doing is good for the land, is good for the people that eat our food, is good for the animals, is good for us farmers, it's good for my hometown. I believe all that sincerely, and so it's, it's easy for me to if anyone's interested in listening, it's easy for me to tell them why I think they should buy our food. So that's kind of how it's been.
And that is so true. You got to believe in it and have that passion there for you to share with others. Also, you mentioned there, as you look at your list of to-do items, that's what you didn't procrastinate on. I mentioned it a few times. I like the Bigger Pockets podcast, real estate podcast. And one thing they talk about quite often is those things you procrastinate on, those are the things you hire someone else to do.
Yeah. I think that's true.
And Jesse, you started with your meat chickens, and then shortly thereafter, a year or two later, you added layers.
Yeah. We essentially sort of, we did meat chickens in 2009. We added layers in 2010, pigs in 2011, turkeys in 2012, beef cattle in 2013, pretty much along that line.
So tell us a little bit about how your layers are set up.
Okay. Yeah, so we have two ways of doing layers right now, and it's not how we've always done them. But we have layers in sort of what people might recognize as a classic eggmobile on, say, a hay wagon frame, a mobile house that has provides shelter and nest boxes for the hens, and then we have we're also doing layers now in schooners. So rather than on a hay wagon frame, it's in one of those 20-foot by 40-foot essentially mobile greenhouses that it has skids and slides across the top of the pasture. So we're now doing both of those, and we've been doing them in the eggmobiles for forever. And this last year we just raised a flock in the schooner, and I was really happy with how that went. And that's something I'd seen that Seven Sons Farm does in schooners, and I saw some advantages there, and I like to try that out, and I've been happy with it. So we'll move more and more to that direction. And then those either eggmobiles or schooners is in combination with the electrified poultry netting, so that the birds can day range on. We generally are making paddocks that are about 3/4 of an acre, and we're moving those at least once a week to fresh pasture. But in the schooner, it looks similar to inside the eggmobile, and then that's where we will have hanging feeders, we'll have automatic waterers, and we'll have the nest boxes. And we've gone to using the rollaway nest boxes more recently in the schooner, and we've been happy with that. Whereas we've used the classic sort of just straw and a nest box kind of setup with the eggmobiles. So yeah, that's kind of what the setup looks like. Again, we pull those eggmobiles in schooner with our 60 horsepower tractor. We also do something a little bit unique among pasture poultry farmers of our scale with the layers, where we ration their feed, so we don't give them unlimited access to feed. And we've been in conversation with Jeff Maddox at Fur Trail about our feed formula and the rationing. And the idea there is that hens will overeat if they're just given free choice feed all day long, and that of course will drive your feed bill up. But it also fatten the hens up to the point where they'll put excessive fat around their ovaries, and it'll actually decrease their lay rate. So you have both a negative of a higher feed bill and a lower lay rate. Now, of course, the upside of doing the sort of free choice feed is it's very low labor. Whereas what we do is we have what we call a feed sled that has enough linear feed space for all the hens to eat at once. Because when you're rationing feed, if you don't have feed space for all the hens to eat at once, then the boss hens will eat too much feed, and the hens on the bottom of the pecking order won't get enough feed. And so they have to all be able to eat at once. So we have this extensive feed sled with essentially 6-inch PVC pipes ripped in half that provides 3 to 4 inches linear space per hen to eat at once. And then we're spreading out, it's about a 1/4 pound of feed per hen per day that we give in 2 different feedings. So you can see that that's more labor, and that we're dumping out 5-gallon buckets of feed twice a day to the hens. And we have to pull this feed sled forward and all this kind of stuff, with the idea that we're saving significant money on the feed bill, and that we're getting a better lay rate. So it's something that I've yet to really do tight math on to see if it really is paying off. But this year we're going to run one flock that's on a free choice feed setup. We're going to track our labor, our feed consumption, and our lay rate, and then another flock side by side that's going to be on the ration feed setup, and track everything likewise, and kind of see, if it really does, one really does pay off for the other. So that's something that might be of interest. And then otherwise, pretty simple setup, automatic waterers. We've installed some buried irrigation on our farm and some of our leased farms that make, hook up to waters for the hens, easy, and less problematic in the colder weather. And we've invested in an egg washer machine that's been really helpful for processing our eggs efficiently. Build a CoolBot refrigeration room to handle all that. That'd be kind of what a good picture of what it all looks like.
Oh, very nice. And that'll be really interesting on your results of the free choice feed versus the ration feed.
Yeah, it'll be good to see. I definitely want to know whether we're, spending our time wisely or not.
True. It sounds good on the rationed feed, but then when you start figuring labor costs, how's it going to end up? I'll be looking forward to hear how that turns out.
Yeah.
And the next thing you added after layers was hogs. Why did you add hogs at that point?
I guess just because, I sort of knew going into building the farm that I wanted to provide the staple proteins. I wanted to be a farm that could provide the basics for our customers.
Oh, yes.
And so, that was sort of always on the list. So it was just, it was going to happen at some point, and that was the time to do it. But yeah, like I mentioned, we ran into some issues where, both our beef herd is growing and our poultry enterprises were growing, and we just made a decision to prioritize the beef and poultry over the pork in terms of who got to use the land. And that just meant that that we decided that we're gonna outsource the pork to two farmer friends. I really enjoy raising pigs, but we just had some issues where we tried to raise pigs on land that wasn't great for them, and we got heavy rain, and it was a total mess and stressful. So we're just like, what? I'm trying to force this. This is not the right thing for this land.
Oh, yes.
And so I sort of learned my lesson there. But my hopes are that we'll be able to get a leased property that will allow us to get back into that in-house.
Very nice. And I think that's an important detail you point out right there, that forcing an enterprise that's not quite appropriate for your land at that time. And, when we look at what our land's available, we have to consider what livestock would benefit the most from it. And I think that was probably a good realization for you. And you get some lease land that works for it, you can bring it back in-house.
That's right.
Pork is something I've talked about. I've talked about it a little bit over the life of the podcast. That I keep wanting to try some hogs, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it's great. I love working with them.
And then the other enterprise you have, then you added turkeys.
That's right.
Or sometime in there. I don't know quite on the time frame.
Sure.
Are your turkeys raised in prairie schooners?
Yeah, and that's not always been that way either, but yeah, that's how we've been doing it, is we will take the turkeys out of the brooder at about 5 weeks, and they'll go into the schooners, and then they'll be in the schooners for, till they're about maybe 10 weeks old, at which point then we start day ranging them as well with electric poultry fencing. So when they're about 10 weeks old, I feel pretty safe about them being big enough to not be taken by aerial predators. The electric poultry fencing really takes care of the ground predators. But like I said, when they're about 10 weeks old, then I think they're pretty safe from aerial predators. And then we'll day range them just like we do the laying hens. So they'll have the schooner as their shelter for bad weather, and has also hanging feeders and waters in there. And then they'll be able to range over, about a 3/4 acre paddock that we're moving at least once a week. That's been I've been really happy with that. That's worked out well for us.
Have the turkeys been pretty easy to market?
Yeah, we've pretty much sold out every year. It's often pretty stressful for me with the turkeys and sales because you know, 80% of the turkeys need to sell at Thanksgiving. And if they don't sell then, especially the whole turkeys, then people just aren't interested in them and they're just going to stay in my freezer. So it's one of those things where I want to sell every whole turkey before Thanksgiving, but also when it's such a high stakes sale, you know, you don't want to mess up someone's Thanksgiving dinner and say sell them one that you end up not having. It can be pretty tricky because you both, on one hand, want to move every bird. On the other hand, you don't want to majorly disappoint a customer and, you know, not have the right size for them or not have the turkey for them. So I think we've made some changes for this upcoming year that I'm pretty happy about. We're actually going to slaughter all of our turkeys by the end of September. Normally we were slaughtering our turkeys in October and November, which made it difficult because we were selling birds that were in the field. And so you're trying to get an estimate of how many of these are going to be smalls and how many of these are going to be larges and that whole mess. Whereas this year, they're all going to be slaughtered by the end of September. We're going to know exactly what birds we have of what sizes. And when we open up sales and deposits October 1st, there won't be any guessing. We'll know exactly what our inventory is. The other tricky thing about turkeys is they take up so much freezer space. And so what we're going to do is we rent cold storage about an hour from us at a cold storage warehouse. So we're going to slaughter all the turkeys in September, have a complete tally of all the birds we have and what sizes, and then we're going to palletize that and ship that all off to our cold storage and get that out of our freezers so it's not jamming up our freezers and making them impossible to work in. And then sell all the birds and then bring them all back, say mid-November or early mid-November from the cold storage, and then move them quickly. So I think this will be a lot less stress and a lot less work. And hope, here's hoping that it'll be an improvement.
Yes, I hope that works out well for you. It sounds like it would, because I do get that. It's hard to sell a product still out in the pasture and not sure what you're going to get on the end product.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to turkeys and all your other animals, you have beef cattle.
That's right. Yeah. So we used to do, cow, calf, and finish. But we, and that was really fun to do the cow calf. But we just realized it didn't make the best sense for our context. Just given the fact that we have a good customer base, we did better financially turning grass into beef as opposed to turning grass into babies. And buying in our stockers from, we've made some connections with some cow-calf producers that are oriented for grass-finished beef. And so we've had, I think, good success buying in these stockers from them and us focusing on finishing. The other reason is that, we have our home farm that's 82 acres, and then we lease about another 500 acres on 3 or 4 other farms. So that just means that we are pretty regularly trailing our herd from farm to farm. And that's just a mess when it comes to cow-calf. And you say, there's a little tiny newborn calf trying to get on a trailer with a whole bunch of 1,000-pound mamas. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. Or a calf that's, sleeping in the tall grass and you can't find where he or she is, and you're trying to get animals loaded up. So anyway, trying to trailer, cow-calf in the middle of a calving season is no fun.
Yes.
And so anyway, for a number of reasons, we decided to get out of the cow-calf and just stick with finishing. And that's, I think, has been a good move for our context. Though I do miss having the calves.
Oh, yes. So tell us a little bit more about your grass finishing. At what size do you purchase them, bring them onto the farm, and when are you finishing them out and processing them?
Yeah, we're generally getting, mostly 500, 800 pound wean stockers. And then, we're taking them, they're finishing around 1,100 pounds. And it's taking us, probably our average is something like 26, 28 months to get to finish. So, I definitely would say that we have lots of room for improvement in terms of improving our pastures and improving our management to get a quicker finish. But that's probably about where we are in average in that like 26 to 28.
So when you say 24, 26 months, is that of age or are you having them that long?
Of age.
Of age. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clarify on
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're bringing in steers that are more in the 3 to 4 frame size. We're not.
Yes.
We're not trying to finish huge animals.
Are you, or do you have specific breeds you're looking for?
I've not been particular for a certain breed as much as I am interested in the breeder. That's what's kind of been more influential on me in the decision, is to find a breeder who has the same goals I have in terms of frame score, in terms of hardiness, in terms of ability to do well on our kinds of grasses in our kinds of weather, without antibiotics, without wormers. That's been more important to me than a particular breed.
Oh, yes. And tell us a little bit more on the finishing portion of them, because you are finishing at 24, 26 months of age. At that point, do you have another set coming in? So you have 2 grazing mobs, a smaller mob and a bigger mob, or do you have multiple ages throughout?
I'm generally buying in stockers in the spring, but I also will sometimes buy in stockers in the fall as well. I guess to date we've generally had enough variation in their growth that we have a spread of animals that are ready throughout the year.
Okay.
Just based on some are performing better than others and they're going to go in first. Mostly we've been buying in groups every spring is what we've been mostly doing.
Do you manage them any different when they get closer to finishing than you do earlier on?
I run them all as one group. I don't separate them out. I guess there will be periods of the year where I'm not going to be slaughtering. So, we don't slaughter from January through April, May. And so in that period of year, I'm more willing to push the animals a little bit. Say if I, have some ground that I want them to do, where I'm going to roll out some hay bales and ask them to do some landscaping work. I'll be more willing to do that then than I would, before they're going into slaughter in, October, November, December, where I'm going to be more sensitive to just focusing on their performance. But like I said, to be totally honest, I think that I have a lot to learn when it comes to cattle management. It's a mixed bag there.
As you think about your farm and your journey thus far, what's been some of your biggest challenges?
I think, the bottlenecks have always usually been sales, land, labor, and capital. And that's probably, probably a lot of people can relate to those bottlenecks. So I think something that's been, like I mentioned before, probably sales is something that it just comes more naturally to me. And so that's not been so, painful, I guess. But I think one thing that I've come across more recently is as I've gone from just being a sole farmer who's got a little bit of help here and there to having a team, is to really learn how to manage employees well, and that also requires a certain level of knowledge of the business that you maybe could fudge when it was when other people weren't involved, but to really do justice to your employees, you can't be ignorant of what's going on in your business and how the business is doing, and what you can afford to pay your employees, or are there going to be cash flow problems sometime soon, so just it's a little bit more serious. It's kind of like going from operating as a bachelor to operating as a family man, in terms of your responsibilities to other people and the way in which you need to kind of have your house in order. So I think that's been a challenge for me. I think that's probably not one of my strengths. Is I'm not the kind of person that just geeks out on organization and planning. I'm more of a sort of like jump in there and get going kind of person. And of course there's probably some virtues in getting going, but there's also some vices where you need to actually take time to plan and organize, so you don't waste time and waste resources. And so I think those are the kind of things, like you mentioned, that things that you procrastinate on. For me, it would probably be more so planning and organization, which I'm trying to work more on and do better with. So to your question of like sort of what has been a challenge, I think that's been a growth challenge for me, is that planning and organization and employee management as the team has grown.
Very good, Jesse. I've enjoyed talking about your journey and what you're doing on your farm. It's time for us to transition into our overgrazing section, where we take a deep dive into something you're doing with your operation. And we discussed earlier, your internships are something a little bit unique in that not everyone does them. So we're going to take a deeper dive into your internship. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we have 3 internship sessions. So there's a spring, a summer, and a fall. The spring we go from April to August. Summer is August to December, and then December to March, or through March. And so they're 4-month-long sessions, and basically the interns live here on the farm, and they do everything that we do. So that entails all the animal operations, moving animals to fresh pasture, feeding, watering, gathering eggs, processing poultry, taking animals to the slaughterhouse, picking up meat from the slaughterhouse, making deliveries to customers, putting together orders, helping customers in the farm store, repairing infrastructure, all those kinds of things. They get exposure to. It's in my, like I said before, I would have greatly benefited from having been able to do that. I had to learn to both farm and to run a business. And if I could have just had those farming skills down and felt confident in that, and know that I know how to raise a chicken, or I know how to raise a beef steer, I just need to figure out how to build a customer base and market and et cetera, that would have been a lot less overwhelming. And I would have cheated the learning curve significantly and been much further along than I am now, and had made less financially negative or emotionally negative experiences along the way. That wasn't open to me just with my stage of life and being married and having a baby. But I think for those who can afford to do it, it's just a great way of cheating the learning curve and getting ahead. And I think it's a great opportunity for those who, on one hand, maybe know they want to be a professional farmer and have that as their career, and they're going to cheat that learning curve, and they have the whole 5-year plan, and that's great. It's also a great way for someone who's interested in the field to have a low-risk way of checking it out, because even if that person were to go and get 25 hens in their backyard, that's not what full-time farming is like. And so if you want to know what full-time farming is like, it's better for you to take that deep dive in a full-on operation, and then you'll actually get to see, hey, is this something that I would enjoy doing? And you don't have to spend a dime to get there. You don't have to buy any infrastructure. You don't have to, buy any animals, etc. You can just get to see it from the inside of an operation, which I think is a really great thing to do for that person as well. And so I think internships are a great way to go, and I think ours is very good. We work hard to take care of our interns, and not only do they get to have all the experiences they get to see in our business, but I offer myself as a sort of lifelong consultant. So I have interns constantly texting me saying, "Hey, what energizer should I buy?" Or what slaughterhouse do you think I should?
Right.
Those kinds of things. So they get to have the benefit of that network. The other thing I would say to those who are interested in internships, I think it's really important that you intern in a farm where you really respect their farming practices on one hand, but then the other important thing is that it's actually a financially sustainable operation. There's lots of farms that are like a nonprofit, or maybe it's just sort of someone who's wealthy that is having fun, or it's subsidized by the spouse in one way or another, something like that. But if your goal as a farmer is to be a full-time professional farmer, then you want to know that you would be emulating something that's going to get you to that goal. So I think just if I were to advise someone who's thinking about an internship, I'd say go somewhere where you really think well of their farming practices and that is actually a viable business, so that if you did what they did, you would also have a viable business. Because if you replicate a nonprofit, that's not going to be a viable for-profit business. So those are kind of like some of my big tips. I think internships are a great way to go, and I think ours is a really good one to consider.
If we have a listener out there that's interested in your internship, what do they do to gain more information and apply?
On our website, there's a page dedicated to our internship program, so they can go there and read more about it. And then the next step would be to email us to get an application.
Are you typically having all the spots filled, or is it still in the growth period?
Yeah, depending on the time of year, we either want 1 to 4 interns. So we've either been filled or close to filled generally the last couple of years. For this spring session that's about to start here in April, we currently have 1 slot that's firmed up, and then there's a number of applicants for the other 3 spots. So we'll see if that fills up by that time or not. But it's kind of right there at the edge, I'd say.
Oh, yes. Very good. Jesse, thanks for sharing more about your internship program. It's time for us to move into our famous 4 questions. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question: what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Yeah, I would say this isn't something that I use regularly today, but it just was so important for my story that I feel like I need to sort of give the shout out to Pasture Poultry Profits, Joel Salatin's sort of seminal early work that was just a go-to reference for getting started for us. So that's not a book that I use regularly now, but it was so critical in getting started that I think that's a good one to throw out there.
Very good. Our second question: what tool could you not live without on your farm?
So I probably have to go with my multi-tool. I never sort of leave the house dressed without it, and I constantly use it, and I insist on our employees and interns keeping one on, because just between repairing water hoses and pipes and fencing stuff, I just am constantly using that. So I'd say that, but I also love the Gallagher geared reels, and that was the other sort of runner up there. So I'd say a good multi-tool is one, and the Gallagher geared reels would be my second.
Oh, very good. Excellent choices. Our third question, what advice would you give to someone just starting out?
I would say, kind of back to one of our previous things we were talking about, was about a mentor. I think that it's critical to find a mentor or some mentors that present a compelling farm model, business model, family life that captures your imagination and is compelling for you, and would be someone who you can lean on for questions and tips, and when you're in difficult spots. So yeah, I think a really excellent mentor is indispensable.
Excellent advice. And lastly, where can others find out more about you and your operation?
We have a website, and we're on Facebook and Instagram. So I think our website is probably the best place to go to, whiffletreefarmva.com. And you can Google Whiffle Tree Farm and find it easily. But that's probably a really great central place to get it. If you want to see some of the fun stuff we're posting on Facebook and Instagram, then that's good to check out too.
Wonderful, and we will post links to your site and your social media in our show notes. Jesse, we appreciate you coming on and sharing about what you're doing in Virginia, and it was wonderful to hear about it all.
Yeah, Cal, thank you so much for talking with me and having me on your show. I really appreciate what you're doing here. I enjoy listening to your podcast and hearing your other guests, and I hope that some of the things we've talked about here will be helpful for other people too.
I think they will be. Thank you, Jesse. I've enjoyed today's conversation with Jesse. You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers, and every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. Should we change our tagline? Jump over to the Grazing Grass community and let me know your thoughts. You can find the Grazing Grass Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we encourage you to share our posts and like our content. Are you a grass farmer? You want to share about your journey and your operation, what you're doing? Go to grazinggrass.com and click on Be Our Guest. And we'll be in touch. Until next time, keep on grazing grass. Hey there, listeners. We appreciate you tuning in and want to continue bringing you the best content we can. But producing a podcast takes a lot of time and effort, so we need your support. You can help us out by joining the Grazing Grass community and becoming a supporter for exclusive content and early releases. Also, you can buy our merch to show your love for the show, or by using our affiliate links to purchase products or services we recommend. If you can't support us financially, please spread the word and tell others about our show. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to bring you more great conversations from grass farmers like you.